Acts chapter 4. We're still crawling through. We're ready and thinking about verse 33. The context, you already know, is this is how God's his work and his power through these first generation Christians was evident in the world. One of the first ways was their outrageous generosity. That my interpretation is they understood they were stewards. No one treated their own possessions as strictly their own, but they were willing, they shared, according to verse 32, they shared everything they had. This is a mindset, and I talked about that. Okay. And then verse 33, with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord. I talked so tiny about that, but it's worth opening up again. We really don't have the manuscript of very many of the sermons that were preached through the book of Acts. We have, of course, we have Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. We have snatches, when Peter and John were brought before the Sanhedrin. That whole episode, Peter, he seizes the opportunity. What they thought was going to be an interrogation, he seizes as an opportunity to preach. But the content of their preaching, according to verse 33, was a testimony about the resurrection of Jesus. Where I was going with that yesterday is that was the first, I keep calling them the first generation, but that's really what they were. That was the theme of the preaching in this first generation. A testimony about and of personal witness about the resurrection of Jesus. We have become, I think, numbed to the power of the resurrection. Oh yeah, Jesus rose from the dead. I heard that. Let's see, I'm 69, so I probably heard it from like the very first Easter I was alive, although I had I couldn't comprehend it. But I think I've actually heard it for at least 64 years. It's like, okay, yeah, he rose from the dead. Happy Easter. That was not the sense, both the emotional and the intellectual or rational sense of these first Christians. They were overwhelmed by the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Paul writes that the same power that resurrected Jesus from the dead is at work in us. Now, when he wrote that in century 1, somewhere around AD 60, there were still people who had witnessed the fact that Jesus had risen from the grave. They were still living, they were still preaching, they were still spreading the news, the information. And it was still a totally rock your world thing. It had not yet been dulled by centuries of acknowledgement. So here's my, I don't know, what do you do with this? Well, for me, it comes down to, I first of all need to put myself in the sandals of the apostles and these first Christians. He was dead. A brutal, bloody, gory death. Unjust. I don't know. What else can you say about it? It was horrible. And he wasn't just swooned. He was obviously dead. Soldiers who dealt in death day after day after day had pierced his side and blood mixed with water had come out. They knew he was dead. And it wasn't like they wouldn't have known. They knew. The emotion attached to that fact for the apostles and those who had put their trust in Jesus as the Messiah, the anointed one, the promised one. I don't know a good adjective to describe how they felt. Dejected. Hopeless. Afraid. And then on Sunday morning, they realized, they knew. They first heard from the women, who, by the way, they kind of doubted. Peter and John ran off to the tomb to saw for themselves that he wasn't there anymore. And then he appeared to them. And according to Luke, in the book of Acts, he appeared to 500, more than 500 people. That's a lot of eyewitnesses. There is more you can say about the resurrection. Tons more. And there are folks who strongly disagree with us that Jesus rose from the dead. They have what I think are pretty poor arguments against it, but they hold solidly to it. So it's not like, well, it's obvious. It is to us, but not to them. Now, okay, so my question was, what do we do with this? Well, first of all, as I said, get the emotional impact that these first Christians experienced. I don't think that's not going to happen for us without intentionally opening ourselves in our imagination to what they would have experienced. Now then, beyond that, there's more. I don't think many Christians, this is a horrible accusation for me to make, but I really don't think many Christians live as though Jesus was alive, that he had resurrected, that he was living. He is living. And some of it is, I've never personally laid eyes on Jesus. So yeah, it's a little difficult. But if there's an old psychological technique called act as if. And the idea is, if you can act your way to a new feeling more surely than you can feel your way to a new action. So what would it look like if I really did believe in the resurrected Jesus? If I truly, if my faith system, my whole paradigm for belief is founded on not just his death, not just his life, but his resurrection, what would that look like? How would that impact my day-to-day life? For me, one of the things is I think I would act more in faith, which that's not even a good way to say it, but I think I would trust him more than I do. I struggle with trust. I'm not going to go into it. Someday I probably will, but you may not. And if you don't, man, I want some of that. But if it's one thing to believe in a teacher, and I mean, his teachings are fabulous. I mean, the ethical and moral implications of Jesus' teachings are still guiding even people who don't believe in Jesus today. Well, and the teachings of Peter, John, Paul, Jude, the apostles is profound. But if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, Paul said it, we're hopeless. We're the most hopeless of all people. But because he did raise from the dead, I can live hopefully. Whatever struggle I'm dealing with, and many of the struggles that lock me up are honestly, they're just, they're not big compared with the biggest picture of all. The biggest struggle, the biggest dilemma is death, and Jesus overcame it. If he overcame that, and if the power that raised him from the dead is still at work in me, I just don't live that way very much. Not as much as I want to. And it's not right for me to accuse you of my struggles. But there's a pretty strong chance that today, Christians, all of us, tend to live where we acknowledge that, we know that, but it doesn't truly affect our lives much. I don't know how else to say it. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for you. The apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. I want my life to be a testimony of the resurrected Lord Jesus, the one who had and has power over everything. If he has power over death, I can be sure he has power over everything else. I think that's why he raised people from the dead before his own death. I mean, there was the widow of Nain. It's a very emotional story. Jesus entered the town, and a funeral procession was coming down the street. It was the only son of a widow. She was obviously devastated by her son's death and deeply sorrowful. Jesus goes to the funeral that he attended. He interrupted in the most amazing way. He raised the boy from the dead. He raised Lazarus from the dead. And it's not, he also raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. It's not like these folks were just kind of, in a coma. They were for real dead. And he raised them from the dead. Why would those stories be included? Just as a precursor to the fact that he also resurrected from death. And okay, so live like you believe the resurrection. I guess that's the bottom line. See you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.